Jay Baba, can you hear me all right? And I too like to start with a quote. And Baba said, I have only one message to give, and I repeat it age after age. Love God. One can love God as he ought to be loved by trying one's utmost to make others feel happy, even at the cost of one's own happiness. Baba has had his eye on me for a long time. And it took me some time to really see this in the sense that I was um, somehow fortunate enough to be born into the Shaw family. Because when you're a child in a family, you don't think of it that way. You're just living a normal child's life. But it was anything but, because from day one, it was a Baba life. And our parents never tried to convince us anything about Baba. We each came to Baba on our own, but nevertheless, their influence was profound. From the earliest days I can remember, there was talk about Baba in the house, and there were meetings, and they would sing hymns, the old hymns around the organ, and have meetings. Well, we kids were sent to bed, and that made me all the more interested because I couldn't participate. And so right from the start, for me, there was a really strong interest in participating. From time to time, Jeanne and Darwin were given fasts or other kinds of orders, and we kids wanted to be a part of it, but we were kids and weren't allowed to do it, and that made me even more interested. Um, in Darwin used to introduce Narina and at lectures in New York, and one time we children had an interview with Narina, and it was that time I felt Baba's love as different from my parents' love. With parents, you can't make a distinction, but through her, I felt Baba's love, and from that moment on, I realized that this is what I wanted in life, was to be with Baba and to love him. Um, the main thing was in my parents' life was their example. It's not what you say, it's how you live it. And that's what influenced me the most. Their dedication, their obedience, and their love. And we stayed at the center in 1948-49. Darwin was working at the center, and our family was living in Elizabeth's house. And so for a year, we had the chance to come out to the center when there was no one else here. And it was such a beautiful place then as it is now. But we used to wonder, will it be like to see Baba here? That was always uppermost in our mind. When are we going to see Baba? Because we waited a long time. Baba wrote us letters when we were younger, and the momentum built up of wanting to see Baba, wondering what it's like to meet him. And so finally the day came. Was May 10th, 1952. Our family had driven down from New York State, and we were staying at an apartment in town. And all five of us, my parents, my brother and sister, and me, had an appointment with Baba here at the center in the Lagoon Cabin over there. I was nervous. I'm the nervous type anyway. And I thought I wouldn't love Baba like my parents did. And so when that door opened, I stepped back, so I let my mother go in front of me. And she did, and Baba opened the door, and he embraced her. And then I followed. And as soon as Baba held me in his arms, I had no thoughts whatsoever. At last, I had come home, to my real home, my spiritual home. I had always had a thirst, and now this was the complete fulfillment of that spiritual thirst of the reality. And so this was this beautiful embrace, first embrace with Baba. And then each of the family received an embrace and sat down. And Baba acted like an old friend of the family. And he was sitting in the Lagoon Cabin at that chair, and he motioned to my parents and said, "How do I look?" You know? And just like old friends, and they said, "Oh, wonderful, Baba," and just saying. And then right away he said, pointed to me and my sister Renee and said, "They haven't seen me before. They love me." So that was that. Right away. Later on, I'll tell you that one. Remind me if I miss it. Absolutely. And so, and meanwhile, um, Renee and I knew shorthand, and here we were taking shorthand notes of what what Baba was saying on the alphabet board, and Adi was reading these rather simple statements, But for us, it was almost impossible to have our minds in gear to get that shorthand down, because when you first meet Baba, sure, he has a physical form, but there's so much more than that, and there's no way you can be prepared for what is given. It's just so far out distances any kind of description. But what I found was that on the surface there was this absolutely wonderful sweetness of Baba, this lightness, real light, and this beauty of Baba, and this all-pervading presence. And then at deeper levels, I found that it was not only his love, but his love was reaching a deeper part of me than I had ever known was me, to the core of me, a place where I know the truth, and it's a sure thing as far as I'm concerned. And he reached me at this deep inner place, and it's like you turn all the buttons on that you never knew were there, and it's a way of knowing that's far more authentic than what you know up here. So that's why it was really hard to write the shorthand. So the interview went on for an indefinite time, because in all the times that we were with Baba, there is a sense of eternity. There's no way of knowing what time it is. So our interview went on in a very warm, happy family way. And then, you see, there were two interviews, one day apart, I think, and I get them mixed up, so I'm going to combine them as one, because that's how it appears to me. So during the course of the conversation, Baba very casually turns over and he looks at my sister and me. He says, "Would you do anything I ask you to do?" And we said, "You don't get 5 minutes." Yeah. He said, and so we said, "Yes, Baba." And I was thinking, well, I read about the Manzili mean days, and I know it can be really hard, and I really will say yes, but I have to think about how hard it will be later. So I said, "Yes, Baba." And then Baba said, "Is that yes or just yes?" And we both said, "Yes, Baba, really yes, Baba." And so Baba went like this, and he said, "Would you jump in the lake?" And I thought, well, I know how to swim. And that wasn't hard. And I said, "Yes, Baba." And then he said, "With the alligators?" And I thought, well, if he means that I would die in the jaws of the alligator, then it's still yes. And this is how Baba's love is just so wonderful. That's the word that's not adequate to say, that you know that you would do this out of love. And then he said, um, they will obey. He was satisfied with, yes, we will jump in the lake with the alligators. And he said, you will obey me without, I'm happy you will obey me without hesitation. And he said, isn't that right, Darwin? They will obey me without hesitation. And later, Renee and I concluded that when Baba said, repeated something over and over, he was making it possible, making it true. Then he said, um, I am in the alligators. I am in the snakes. I am in the deer. I am in everything and everyone. And if you knew that, you would never be afraid of anything or upset by anything. And so we got that down in shorthand. And, yes. Well, that was in 1952. I was in my late teens. And so Baba was pleased with that. And of course, meanwhile, we'd signed our life away, you know. And we were young people, and we didn't give that a thought at all. Nothing of that kind. I mean, it was the greatest happiness to be able to say yes, Baba. And the conversation, of course, went on. And then during another time, in the meantime, we would go back to our apartment and in the evenings go over to the old Lafayette Hotel, and where new people were coming. And my parents would just spontaneously greet all the new people and make them feel at home and welcomed. And my sister and I didn't have anything to do but sit there. And we started looking at the people. And we said, you know, you can tell which people have met Bob and which haven't. Their eyes were just so sparkling. There's a change that comes over people. And for Renee and me, we couldn't stop these tears that just had a life of their own. While we were with Baba and when we weren't with Baba, these tears would come down spontaneously. And also we couldn't stop smiling. Our faces hurt because we were smiling all the time. We were so happy. And then at another interview, you see, at each interview, Baba embraced us. And then at the end of each interview, he embraced us. And at the end of this particular interview, it was my turn for the embrace. And Baba held me so that for just a split second, he gave me the opportunity to look into his eye. His right eye was right smack in front of me. And for that split second, I knew I had an opportunity to look into his eyes and be frightened of what I might see. That's what occurred to me. And I realized that in order to look into Baba's eyes, I had to drop everything. And that is drop everything about me. All my known securities, everything I know about life, my family life, even myself, everything that was security for me, I had to just drop it. And in some ways, later on, I would use the picture, for example, that our family used to go swimming in a northern lake, and on one side of the lake was a high bluff and a rope hanging from a tree. And we'd grab that rope just like in the Tarzan pictures and swing out over into the lake. And when you got out, when you were out there, you had to let go. That's what it's like. Is you have to let go, and you don't know what's going to happen next. So that's exactly the feeling I had of that kind of letting go. And then in that split second, all that happened, and I looked into Baba's eye, and there was, with most people, there's an end to looking. And here was another time where time didn't exist. And I looked into Baba's big brown eye, and I kept looking and looking, and I kept on looking way, way, way into the distance, and the distance had no end to it. And what I saw was not the brown eye anymore. It was formless, colorless, pure light and pure beauty. And I was in it. And that's who Baba is. And I was there in an eternity. And then it was probably as quick as any ordinary embrace. And no one knew the embrace was over, and no one knew what was going on inside me. And that's how Baba is with people. He can, the most profound thing can happen, and no one knows, and it's just this intimate time with him. So that's never left me, of course. So in 1952, a lot of people had interviews here at the center, and then there was the big day for Darshan of May 17th. Baba gave Darshan at the barn, and I don't know how many. Do you know how many people it might have been? Quite a few hundred people came. It was open to everyone. It's an open day, and people, the townspeople came, people's friends and relatives came, and Baba sat in that big chair that you see in the barn by the fireplace. My mother was one of those asked to be at the back door of the barn to help guide people, and my sister and I thought, well, that's a good idea. We'll hang out there too. And we did. And every time the door opened, we got this whiff of Baba's love and his sweetness would come through. And these people would come down, and many of them would be so struck by Baba's love that they had to be led and had to be careful not to go into the lake or off into the woods. They were very struck. So that was a wonderful day. And when the black people came, Baba stood for all the black people. And I don't know, it went on for many, many hours. People were given a pamphlet to read beforehand, and then they went in and had a very brief meeting with Baba. And someone had asked Baba, oh, why was it so short for each person? And not just so they didn't have a chance to sit down and talk with him. It was just a brief touch. And Baba said it was so that he could touch them at the heart level and before their mind had a chance to work. And he certainly did. He touched them at the heart level. Very much so. So then later on, Baba had the accident in Oklahoma and then was brought back to Myrtle Beach. And then later on in July, Baba was in New York and at a house in Scarsdale. And he had made pre-arrangements for Darwin and John Bass to be available, and that's his story. But he also gave interviews at Mrs. Deuce's apartment in New York City for, I think, 3 days. And our family was asked to be on hand during this time. And of course, it was we were so excited to be with Baba once again. And just to be there and for whatever was happening. And my mother was asked to be in the reception room, and she was supposed to ask people to read this huge poster board. And many of you probably are familiar with what it said, and I can only just paraphrase it. And it goes something like Baba said, I am approachable to all through, and he named all the isms, and through no ism at all. And so it was very important for everyone to read that. Another time, Baba called my mother in and my brother and sister and me in, and he gave her a big bowl of grapes and instructed her to go out into the interview room and sit there and feed us the grapes. And we were embarrassed to sit in front of all these people and eat all these grapes, and they were wondering what was happening. And so Baba didn't explain all those things. But we all, oftentimes Baba gave someone some fruit or something, and we sort of thought the grapes were symbolic of giving the seeds of love to people. And in later years, I thought Baba might have been using a sort of an archetype where my mother was feeding Baba children, and in years to come, that's what she was doing, feeding Baba's love to Baba's children. And we thought maybe Baba was setting that up. And then another story about food was when Baba called Renee and me into the interview room and asked us if we would make a fruit salad for him. Oh, that was wonderful. We got a chance to obey Baba and do something. We were very happy. And then he motioned to me and to come over and stand. He had me come very close to his shoulder here, and he held up his alphabet board and he looked up at me like this, like he wanted me to catch on that I was supposed to read the alphabet board. And I go, and so I said, okay. And I watched him slowly point to these letters. And then he stopped and looked at me, and I looked at him, and I thought, oh my gosh, I don't know what it said. And and I only got that it was 4 letters. And I said, I don't know, Baba. And then he goes, okay, like that, and does it again. And I really tried to concentrate hard. And he did it again. And then he looks up again. And I said, no, Baba. And, or that I didn't get it. And so the third time, I've got to get it. And so I concentrated on the last 2 letters. And then when he asked me again, you see, he didn't use ESP that time. He made me work for it. And so I got the letters and I said, oh, soft. And he said, yes, an emotion like that to make the fruit salad soft. And so it was a very, very hot day in New York City, and we were totally unaware of it being so hot. And we were in the kitchen with the cooks there, and they got this. It was a big bowl, really big bowl, and all kinds of fruits: oranges, grapefruits, peaches, nectarines, plums, grapes, everything. And Renee kept saying, "Mush it, Foster, mush it," and the salad turned out. I hope it was salted properly because it was our tears that salted the salad. And because we were so happy to do it. And later Renee heard that Baba liked the salad because his teeth were out because of the accident and he couldn't eat anything else. So another time in Mrs. Deuce's apartment, I was stationed upstairs to answer the phone, and the phone was right next to the bed. And someone would come in and sit on the bed, and then the phone would ring, and they would answer it. So I never actually answered the phone all day. But Baba had me there for another purpose. And while I sat there, I began to think about, having just met Baba and how I had committed myself to obey him, and I wanted to always love him. And for me, this is very, very serious, that you don't just have Baba's love and obey him and don't do something about it. And for me, it meant making changes for myself, in myself, with myself. And so I set to work doing something I'd never done before and didn't know how to do, but I was discovering that I had to change my inner structure of thinking. All my thinking patterns and patterns of responding to life, responses, habit patterns, that I really needed to do something about these things in a very serious way, so that I would have a foundation to draw upon, a better foundation to draw upon. And it's very difficult to describe what was going on, but if you can imagine one's inner structure as something like cards built up, and I was taking them all out and saying, this isn't going to work, this isn't going to work, and taking them all out. And finally, all the cards were out. And there was no structure. And that's a really scary moment because you don't want to walk away from it. And little by little, it was like, all right, we'll put this in over here and we'll put that in over there, and we got to work on this and have to work on that. And little by little, this is very, very difficult work, really hard work to confront yourself and challenge yourself, challenging your thoughts and your feelings and your reactions, and trying to be as honest as you can be. So that's what I was doing all day. And after the end of the day, it was like, phew, that was a lot of work. And so after the day was over and the interviews were over, Baba called all of us into his room. And we all crowded in and sat on the floor in front of Baba. And he started having someone tell the King Janak story. I won't go into that now. But while the story was going on, he was flashing messages to people. And he looked right at me, this eye contact, and he did like that. And when he did like that, I got the whole flash that not only did he knew what was going on with me upstairs, and he liked it, but he was doing it with me. He was telling me, oh, you got to take that out, you got to put that in, and he was doing it. It was so clear to me that that's what it was all about. And from then on, I knew that Baba knew everything about me, and that I could trust him with my innermost being, and that I had the space, that he would take care of everything, anything and everything with me. And you can always count on him. That's been my life experience. And so that's how that was and still is. We've had many other happy times with Baba. In 1956, when Baba came, we were all very excited. We all had in our family, we all were working and had jobs and had enough money to pay for our fare to travel with Baba across the United States. And so we were very excited about this opportunity. And can you imagine there were only about 39 people plus Baba's Mandali? I mean, now, you'd fill many airplanes. But first we saw Baba here at the center and spent time with Baba at the center. And I'm just going to skip around. At one time at the barn, and it may have been 1958, sometimes I get the years mixed up. There was a time at the barn when Baba had everyone together, and I think there might have been 200 people at the barn, and he asked who would obey me, and raise your hand. And one fellow said, I don't know if I can obey you. And Baba says, would you try? And he said, yes. This is paraphrasing it. And so Baba said, all those who would try to obey me, raise your hands. And everyone raised their hands. And Baba said, I'm very happy you will all obey me. And if you love me 100%, you will obey me. And that's when I started thinking, oh my gosh, how do I know if I love him 100%? And that bothered me. But it wasn't long before Baba answered my question. One day he had our family into the Lagoon Cabin, and I don't remember all that was taking place at that time, but very nonchalantly, Baba said, "They love me 100%." And I went like that. Inside I was practically jumping up and down. Did you hear that? And I never forgot that. And years later, I said to my mother, do you remember when he said that?" And she said, "Yeah." And I said, "What did you think?" And she said, "Oh, yes." She already knew. So that's how that went. Um, there in 1952, Baba's Eastern women disciples were here. Mani, Mira, Mani, Goher, Meru, along with Kitty, Rano, and others. And the Eastern women were staying in the guest house. And at one point, Baba said to my mother and Renee and me that we should go over and meet them. And so we did, and this was our first meeting with them. And they all looked so beautiful and so young and so sweet. It was just the most heavenly time that we spent with them in the living room at the guest house. And they went and got Baba photo albums, and we went over them and said, "Which one do you like?" and all of that. And so we had a delightful time with them. And we had more than one visit with them. In fact, at one point during those visits, um, Baba strolled in the house. And it was just so sweet having Baba in this room, in that little living room with us, all of us women there. And it was just very, very sweet, uh, and very, very beautiful. And my mother was telling the women how this was like a garden, God's garden, and how our family used to always, we didn't have Baba songs, and we used to always sing "In the Garden," that hymn, and they loved that. So, there were times when we went to the beach with Baba. In 1956, we all trailed through the center. Baba walked extremely fast, and he walked all around the center. And when he went to the beach, we went over the pathway there, and we all walked just as fast as we could, and everybody was kind of elbowing for position to be close to Baba. And all went out on the beach. And this first time was to collect shells for the Eastern women, because they went with us in 1956. And so people scattered around to look for shells, and the pickings were really slim. And by the time I found one, it was really not all that good. And I was going to go back and look to see where Baba was to show it to him, and all of a sudden he walked right up to me, and so I held out the shell. I knew what I thought of it, and he takes it and he looks at it, and sure enough, he makes a face, and and he goes like that, and he hands it back to me backwards like that, and so I have the shell. So it wasn't so bad. And then another time was in 1958 when Baba came. Before he came, a message was sent up to Schenectady that I was being asked to help out with Billy Eaton and Ella Winterfeld at Baba's house, to help out doing the early morning light housekeeping before the day's activity started and before Baba came to the main part of the center. And I was just overjoyed because of that. And each morning here, Darwin would pick us up and drive us around to Baba's house. And we three, Darwin would go in the back, but we three would walk into the front and start the dusting and cleaning and then we would probably pass Baba in the hallway, and he'd come out to the living room and talk with the other Mandali there. And meanwhile, we would go into the back rooms, and we took turns changing Baba's bed sheets. We all three did it, and we changed position each day, and so that we all shared equally in that special privileged time. And each time we finished, we would work very fast. And when we finished, we would quickly go into the living room and sit down in front of Baba and just have a love feast there while he was talking about plans for the day or something else. And that was just very precious to us. But one morning, when we were, and then after we finished that, Baba would go out the front door and into the car and be driven to the main center. And we, all the workers, would go out the back door and wave to Baba. And we never missed a chance. And so this one day, Billy and Ella had walked into the living room before me, and I saw that Dr. Duncan's bedroom door was open. And that's the room where the round table is now. He had been doing night duty, and so his room was never open to be cleaned. And this day, it was obvious that this room was open and needed to be cleaned. And this moment of decision, you know. And so I went in, and as I began my cleaning, I looked through the wall, you know, and had a little word with Baba. You know, I'd rather be there, but I'm going to stick to my duty and do what I have to do. And so I worked double time doing it all. And by the time, maybe Baba even waited for me, but by the time I finished, Baba was going out the front door, and I thought, oh, I missed. And I ran out the back door. Baba was in the car by that time, and he either honked the horn or somehow he got my attention, and he pointed to me, and he went like this for me to come over. I went, me, and I ran over to the car and leaned down, and Baba moved his hands up, and he went like this to me, caressed my face. That was worth everything. It was such a beautiful moment. But there were many, many scenes with Baba walking around the center, stopping to talk with one person or another person. And now there was another time at the beach. It was the last day in 1958. And when we had the time to sit on the floor with Baba, he said, tomorrow is the last day, and we may do this or that, or we might go to the beach. And I thought, well, and he said, it's very important to be physically close to me. And I thought, oh, that's for me to remember this time. Even if I have to elbow, I'm going to be close. So when Baba was driven to the beach, this time he didn't walk because he was being carried in the chair in 1958 after his accident. He was driven to the beach, and then he sat in the chair and was carried onto the beach. And from the time he was carried onto the beach, I was standing right next to his shoulder as closely as I could get. And I had already taken off my shoes, and I had a sunback dress with a little white cotton bolero, and I took that off. I had it on my arm, and I followed through. And there, you know how the water pools in part of the beach there. We walked right through that, and then first thing you know, the tempo picked up, and it seemed like we were speeded up, and all of a sudden we were headed right for the ocean. And we didn't stop. There was no slowing down. We went right into the water at the same speed, and it seemed like, you know, my thoughts weren't there. I was going to go wherever Baba was going to go. And we kept on going. And some people were knee deep and more, with their shoes on and all. But there was this excitement, this rush into the water together with Baba for who knows what. And we stopped when we were deep enough for Baba's feet to be put in, to touch the water. So twice Baba had had a seat in the Atlantic Ocean here at Myrtle Beach in 56 and 58. Then, after his feet were in the water, he signaled to be taken back up onto the bank of the beach, and they set his chair down, and I was still at his shoulder, and as they set his chair down, it dawned on me, his feet are wet, and there's no towel. But I had my little jacket, cotton jacket, and I just sort of gently tossed it down, and somebody used it to wipe his feet. And then someone passed it back, and there I stood. And why you miss the beat when you do that. You miss out uh, because Baba's always got more to you. You're not supposed to pause and savor it. You're supposed to keep going. And while I was doing that, they had taken off down the beach. And I had to run to catch up to them. And by the time I did, the word had gone out. Baba was put down again. And Baba said, the women could carry him. And all these women got a hand, a finger, a thumb on the chair. And when they picked it up, it was like this. And it really looked like Baba might fall out. And so Baba, and I got there just in time to put a finger on to just touch it. And so Baba didn't have that go on for too long. He had them have on. But women had their chance. And another time, Baba called women to his house because he said Mara couldn't be here, and he wanted to pass out gifts from Mara to the women that he knew. And there were quite a few of us who came into the house and into his bedroom, and all across the bed were all these nice pieces of gifts there of various kinds. And he said, I forgot what Mara wanted to be given to whom. And he went like this, I don't know who should get what. And so he would just sort of pick things up and say, is this it, or is this okay for people? And Renee and I made the same, what we call the same faux pas. Everybody does that once in a while with Baba because you don't know any better. And he picked up these beautiful, long, dangling, pierced earrings. And in those days, no one pierced, very few people pierced their ears. And I just blurted out the first thing that came to my mind. Oh, I don't have pierced ears. And, no time for a second thought. And Baba just goes like that, and he puts them down. And he picked up a nice necklace for me, and I said, oh, that's nice. And so Baba did the same thing with my sister, and he picked up something else for her, and he picked up a nice pocketbook for my mother. And of course, everyone was absolutely delighted. It was such a happy time with Baba and just the women. These times with Baba and the women were very, very sweet. And to me, they epitomize the best and the most beautiful part of what it is to be a woman. He brought that out in women, I think. And then we were in the living room at the same time, and Baba looked at me and said, "What are you thinking?" And I said, "Would it be a good idea if we wrote a thank you note to Mira?" And he said, "Yes, yes, everybody should write a thank you note." And then just before that, he said, "Did everyone sleep last night? And who didn't sleep well?" And I said, "I didn't." And so he motioned like, "All right, tell me about it. Like, what did you do?" I got the idea that the question was, what did you do while you weren't sleeping? And I said, I thought of you, Baba. And he went, so, and of course, Darwin tells about the times when Baba had men at the house. So men got their equal time too. So, And also in 1958 was uh, there, Baba suffered a great deal. And he said, before he came, he said of this Sahavas, he said, I expect from you a deep understanding of my self-imposed suffering, begotten of compassion and love for mankind. And by witnessing this, by witnessing me, that's a paraphrase, you will be sharing in my universal work. So it's not all fun and games. And Baba was suffering a great deal. And at one point, one morning in Baba's house, I was still in the living room when Baba came by into the living room. He was being assisted by the men. And it was a very, very poignant moment. I saw all the suffering on his face. And just before he came in, I found this little amber plastic, tiny, tiny bracelet at the foot of the chair, that gold chair in the living room. And I picked it up and I was holding it and I thought, what am I going to do with this? I thought, I can't ask Baba now. Look at him. It's too much to interrupt him in this mood. So I didn't. I went into the other bedroom, where the twin beds were. And Priest Donati came along and I said, what should I do with this? He took it and he came back and he said, keep it. So while I was holding it, after cleaning, I sat down in the living room as we were doing that. And Baba started telling about Jesus' crucifixion. And that's how I relate the suffering and this bracelet, because it always reminds me of that scene while I was holding it. And in my earlier years, I was brought up in Christianity as well. And I was always very, very concerned about Jesus' crucifixion and trying to fathom it. Of course, no one else knew that except Baba. And so here he was explaining it to me. Not like saying that to me, but he was in the room, knowing I would understand. And the words were simple, but it was a whole book behind what he said. And he said, when Jesus suffered on the cross, he suffered as a man would suffer. He didn't relieve himself of the suffering. And it just spoke volumes to me, and I understood a little bit more of what that meant, that God in human form suffers himself so much to come down to our level and suffer for our sakes, and so that we can be free. And that's what he has done. It's a lot to think about. Then another time was at the barn, because we spent so much time at the barn. Besides the interviews that Baba gave at the Lagoon Cabin during 1956 and 58, he spent whole mornings at the barn, whole afternoons at the barn, hours and hours. And one day, Baba said, I hear there's going to be a men's program. And they said, there is? And then they said, oh, yes, there is. And so they got together this men's program. And it turned out to be one hilarious comedy. We have never seen anything so funny in our lives. It was held in the barn, and they had a live band and live music. And as the Baba walked in, the players played as the saints come marching in. And that started it off with a bang. And it was absolutely hilarious. And Baba laughed so hard he said he almost broke his silence. Um, and the and we watched him laugh, and then there was almost like a chuckle from him. Afterwards, Baba said, "Now all those who had anything to do with this come and receive an embrace." And my mother, being very smart, realized that she had donated a safety pin to hold up the sheet. Technically correct. And yes, yes, that was important, all but for a safety pin. So she went up for her embrace, and her face, Baba held his face next to hers, and his tears of laughter rubbed off on her face. And in our family, I noticed that her sense of humor escalated from that time on. Who knows? So, but then after that, the band struck up Begin the Beguine, and Baba went into this deep mood, very, very quiet mood, as he had done many times before. And when he would be in such a mood, we knew he was doing inner working. We would all stay at a distance and not disrupt him or disturb him. He was brought out from the barn and outside in the chair, and he sat there for a few minutes. And then after a while was brought back to the main part of the center and sat in front of the Lagoon Cabin. Meanwhile, we all walked back and gathered around in front of the Lagoon Cabin, and at a respectful distance. And we all watched. What was happening was more than we could fathom. But all of nature was participating. The loud summer sounds of the crickets and the joy of the birds and even the ocean we couldn't hear. There was absolute stillness and silence pervading in the center. And it seemed like we all entered into that silence. This to me was a very important observation, that we all were entering Baba's silence this way. That it's an important thing to do. And we have this chance to enter his silence with him. For whatever it was, we had no way of knowing. And of course, we were trying to see Baba. And I was behind many people, and I would be up like that trying to see Baba. And at one point where I was stretching even more from his silent state, he looked up at me and met my eyes. And it was almost like he was in front of me, this eye contact. And with it, it was a flash, a terrific impact of who and whatever God is, Baba is that. I was completely dazed by it. It wasn't something that happened in my mind. It just happened in my being. And I was just non-functional. I had all I don't know what happened next after it was over. I just went to my cabin and I was just sitting there in that dazed state. I was going to sit there the rest of the day. But my sister came along and said, "Aren't you coming to eat?" It was lunchtime. So I made the effort to get up and go to have lunch. But many others had similar experiences, these flashes of a deeper uh, insight into who Baba is and this feeling of that. And another thing is, I wanted to say about Baba is that when we feel Baba, even though we see him out there and we feel his love so much, his love isn't out there. Where do we don't feel it out there. We feel it in here. And so that's where we feel Baba's love. And that's the way it is for everyone. And when Baba looked at us, he was seeing himself in us. And then you have to know, if he's seeing himself in us and he's happy, you have to just accept that, what that means. there was a time in in New York City in '56 when Baba had this Schenectady group in the interview room. And after the group interview was over, he held our family uh, back into the room and had us stay with him. He sat in a chair, and we five just sat on the floor around Baba. And just were happy to be there sitting with him. And then Baba just wasn't speaking to us in any way. We didn't miss it. We were just sitting together, and Baba was pouring his love on us, just pouring it. And we were. He made it possible. He enabled us to receive all the love that he was giving us, and we were not savoring it. We were not keeping it. We were giving it all back to Baba. And this was this give and take of love from Baba, and we were giving it to him. This just went on, and we were enveloped in this beautiful light of, of Baba's love, peace. We don't know how long it went on. And Baba said, people live for this and that, but this is my food when I'm with my lovers. And this is what it is all about, to love him from the depths of our being. And he enables us to love him and give him. To love isn't just to receive, it is to give your all wholeheartedly. And so after the interview, after the session was over, it was over the lunch hour, Baba gave each of us a chocolate piece of candy for lunch, for croissants. And so I think there's so much more I could say, but I think I'd like to end on that note. Jai Baba.